schools that were considered as SREB designed that playbook.
Okay. And the fact that it's still ongoing.
Yes, yeah. Well, everything's ever changing. The best we can do is have conversations.
That's why we decided to call it the in progress, because for every scenario somebody comes up with, something happens. And it just throws a monkey wrench in everything.
Everything is a work in progress, no doubt, no doubt.
Okay, we are right at 3 o'clock, so count down from 10 and we will be live.
Okay, great. Okay, well, welcome everyone watching us on Facebook Live this afternoon for this week's edition of Innovations in Education for a Big, Bold Future. We're pleased to have with us a really fabulous panel to talk about reopening schools. We know that conversation is changing daily in our local school boards, teachers, district administrators are just really struggling with how we're going to get school opened back up for our students and what that might look like with all the safety measures in place, but also a real focus on learning. So I'm excited about our conversation this afternoon. We have with us, and I'll just introduce everybody quickly, Carrie Ballinger, who is the Superintendent of Rockcastle County Schools. Carrie, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Casey Allen, Superintendent, Ballard County Schools. Welcome again, Casey. We were happy to have Casey just a couple months ago to talk about college and career readiness and graduation. So at the time, Casey, you guys were trying to finalize your last minute plans to get those seniors across a virtual or a figurative stage.
Yes, yeah. So now we're starting the other end. Good to be
now
here.
You're starting the other end. Well, welcome back. Thank you. And Dr. Janice Wyatt-Ross, who is the principal of the Success Academy in Fayette County Public Schools. Janice, welcome.
Thank you.
Eric Kennedy with the Kentucky School Boards Association, fresh off of Kentucky Tonight the other night. Eric, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And finally, Dr. Stephen Pruitt, currently or now with the Southern Region Education Board as President and CEO, and a familiar face to all of us in Kentucky as Kentucky's former Commissioner of Education. Stephen, thank you so much for giving us this time this afternoon.
Always glad to be in Kentucky, even if it's virtual.
Wonderful. So I just want to start off to kind of set a little bit of context for those listening in. There's so much swirl of information. The fact of the matter is that earlier this summer, the American Association of Pediatrics issued guidance to the nation that schools should be working to bring students back to school buildings in the fall. While school districts and the Kentucky Department of Education have worked tirelessly coming up with guidance and recommendations for returning to in-person classes, the reality of COVID is changing daily, and there's now growing concern about a spike in coronavirus cases if students and teachers return to school buildings. No school districts are exempt from this extraordinary challenge, but there are unique challenges in rural and urban districts, including access to broadband internet, which we've talked about a lot and we'll talk about more again today. But also today in our conversation, we want to explore how we can continue to maintain excellence in public education in such an unprecedented time, how we ensure students who need the most help to achieve receive the necessary supports. And we hope to uncover innovative solutions that folks across the state are considering that will serve us well now and into a big, bold future. Leaders are striving harder than ever to deliver on the promise of public education, and today's show will highlight just how that's happening across Kentucky. So Dr. Pruitt, I'd like to start with you, as you've been thinking through the lens of our southern states, 10 southern states?
16.
Say it again.
16. We actually go from Delaware down to Florida, over to Texas, and back up through Arkansas, Kentucky to West Virginia.
All right, so 16 southern states. And SREB has released a playbook on reopening. So you all came together as a team, thought about what needs to go into that playbook. So share with us first what some of the kind of key areas you considered and any guiding principles in putting that playbook together.
Sure. So what we did, and I would like to think that my time in Kentucky people would associate this with me, but I like bringing a lot of people together. So we brought together 2 people from each of our states at varying levels. It's one of the few places I've seen where you can actually see a state education commissioner having a debate with the teacher of the year, because we had literally that whole span of people. And what we did was, in our conversations, we really narrowed things into 3 buckets: governance and operations, health and safety, and quality instruction. And so all those things were kind of the big buckets that we looked at. But one of the things that became increasingly evident is the incredible complexity of any decision that has to be made. Whether you're talking about blended learning or hybrid learning, and you're having to talk about the buses, well, the buses lead to a finance conversation. So all those things really kind of get wrapped up into a big ball. So we really focused on trying to tease out those 3 buckets first, and then starting to try to blend those back together. We didn't try to beat anybody to the punch. KDE has actually done a pretty stellar job, I think, of what they put out so far. In fact, they were one of the first states in the country to put out real guidance around special needs students. And so we actually take those things and we work them into our playbook. We put actions with each of those buckets. Here are the things you should consider doing. And then we link it to the various states or districts who have kind of shown some exemplar components in that particular area.
Okay, wonderful. So we will, as is our practice, link to provide a hyperlink in the Facebook comments below this broadcast for folks to access the SREB playbook with state-by-state profiles. Is that correct?
So they're not state-by-state profiles. It's just the overall
Okay.
reopening. You can actually access all the state profiles on our website as well, but that part of the website is just focused on that. We also did add, just as a side note, we developed a template that districts can use to develop their reopening plans. In some of our states, they're actually using that at the state level where districts are required to submit that to the state. And that's based on those 3 buckets and the actions within the playbook.
Okay, I see. So governance, health and safety, critical. And the third principle?
Quality instruction.
Quality instruction.
And the common theme throughout all of those has got to be equity. That throughout every decision, how are you ensuring, and this is a Stephenism, I guess, or Pruittism, how do you ensure no invisibles? How do you ensure that there's no child invisible to quality instruction, to using governance to ensure safety and quality instruction of each child?
No invisibles. So that sounds like a great hashtag. No
I think
invisibles.
so. I just came up with that, actually.
Okay, hashtag no invisibles, hashtag Pruittisms. I got
There
it.
you go.
All right. Okay, so Stephen, as you're looking at those 3, first unpack the governance piece for us. So I think the health and safety is pretty clear, and we want to talk about that more. And Eric, I'm going to ask you to talk about that through the lens of KDE's report, Healthy at School. And the quality instruction we'll definitely get into and understand, but share a little bit more what you were thinking about in the governance space.
So one of the biggest and most important parts of the governance component is actually a discussion around state and local task forces. One of the things that we're seeing across the South is that there is a very big difference in how people are communicating what their plans are. And I think there's often some concern about, well, we don't have all the plans, so we shouldn't communicate yet. Well, here's the thing. In the absence of information, people make stuff up. And that's not where any school district wants to be. And so a big part of our governance, the first step, is creating a local task force, a local group that includes community, parents, teachers, principals, and obviously the district office. Realizing that they're your first line of communication, realizing that whatever comes out of this, there needs to be people people in the community and including in the schools can say, oh, I know that person. They're actually sitting on there giving voice to my concerns as well. So that's a really big piece is to ensure that communication's there and that your teachers and principals know what's happening on the front end. We do a part about calendars and schedules, walking through what are the kinds of actions that you need to be thinking about, whether you're going with an A-B schedule, whether you're going with partial day schedule. In Virginia, for instance, they're bringing back early childhood and special needs students first. And what are the implications to the budget if you do that, around transportation, around those kinds of things. And obviously technology. Technology is huge, and we know in Kentucky that especially in some of our rural areas, we don't have the ability to connect with each child. But even in our urban areas, we have children who have internet that, or broadband that runs through the street, but because they, of their own expense, they can't afford the broadband, or there's only one device in the house. And then of course, we've got a big piece on funding. And, you know, needless to say, funding overlays so much of everything that we do, but thinking about how to leverage the different funds that are coming from the federal government as well as state government it was a big part of our conversation.
Yeah, great. And broadband digital divide has been a big part of our conversation the last few months. And so I know other southern states are with us and hoping we'll see something in the stimulus package that comes from Congress in the next couple of weeks. But ultimately, there's a lot of state work that needs to happen here. So really thinking creatively at the community level too about how to make sure families have access. And it's not just a low income issue in rural areas, it's actually an infrastructure issue.
Absolutely. And with that infrastructure issue, it's rethinking some of the policies. It's thinking about, you know, how do I evaluate whether a student is actually absent or not? Because they may not be able to be on at 10 o'clock in the morning because their brother has to be on their computer at 10 o'clock in the morning. So we have to really rethink how we're accounting for students. And that's why I say, again, hashtag no invisibles. But the way we have to go about that, I think, is very different, and it requires a lot of thinking and innovation on our part.
Yeah, innovation is key right now, right? We all need to bring our best thinking to the table. We do have a question from a viewer, and that's one of the things we do. One of the reasons we like the Facebook Live platform is because families, citizens across the state can ask us questions and pose those questions to you all. So this question comes from Larry Holliday, a Pritchard Committee member in Northern Kentucky, and he asks, is the playbook primarily intended for school employees, or are there parts appropriate for the public?
So it's in large part it's for the employees, but there's actually a lot that can be gleaned by the general public, in particular around things like the task force, understanding about funding and how to leverage different resources. But there's also some really important parts in the quality instruction playbook of what you could be looking for from the standpoint of a parent of what quality might look like when you're talking about blended or virtual instruction. You know, really thinking through some pretty important issues, like, you know, are teachers really thinking what standards might be better for face-to-face versus those that are virtual? Are you providing a good support for parents who may have to support learning at home? You know, is there an appropriate amount of diagnostic assessment? And just to be clear, when I say that, I'm actually talking about on the teacher's part, not that we go out and buy a lot of tests. We don't need to stop dropping tests here, but are we really providing the professional development and support for our teachers to have kind of a diagnostic mindset at the beginning of the year? Personally and organizationally, we don't really believe in the prioritization of standards or the you know, power standards type deal. We believe that you actually should be evaluating each student and accelerating that learning by designing instruction that actually is going to provide them better opportunities to catch up instead of just trying to remediate them. I mean, remediation, there's no research that says remediation works. It ends up being worksheets, and worksheets don't grow dendrites. You do actually have to have a plan that accelerates these kids to get to their grade level. And so things like that, I think, are quite good for the community to go and take a look at and see what they should be expecting in their schools.
So Larry, yes.
About the schools.
Right. So Larry, it sounds like the answer is a clear yes. The public needs to pay attention as well. And, on that note, Dr. Pruitt, as you talked about worksheets don't grow dendrites, another good tweetable phrase there. I want to turn to you, Dr. Wyatt-Ross, to just through the principal lens. How are you thinking about some of the things that Dr. Pruitt just talked about in instruction, assessment? How do we know, how will we know in the fall where students are? And what are you thinking about and kind of moving them forward wherever they are?
Excuse the phone ringing in the background.
No problem.
Some of the things that I am thinking about as we talk about planning lessons, even if it's in person or virtual, we need to design lessons that are 10 to 15 minutes in length, mini lessons, not a whole 60-minute or 90-minute lesson, especially if we are in person, because with the sanitizing requirements, we won't have time to do all of that. And thinking about what Dr. Pruitt said, I was in agreement with him talking about the remediation. We need to continue with our education. We need to continue allowing students to have access to the general education curriculum, and not a lot of, we can't have a lot of worksheets, or we shouldn't have a lot of worksheets, because we don't know the level of technology that the child has in the home. They may have printers, but printer ink is very, very expensive. Printer ink and printer paper. So we need to also think about, as he said, there may be one device in the home that has to be shared with siblings and parents. So thinking about things that students, and with my students in particular, we initially gave them the guidance, teachers would be available from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. That didn't necessarily work, because a lot of my students work and they have jobs. So they are at work during those hours. And there were times when I was up at 2:45 a.m. Their teachers were up at 3 a.m. working with students and helping them with their instruction. So those things we have to think about, thinking outside the box, and providing lessons that students can access whenever they have the ability to access those. They can pull those up whenever they have internet access, or at those times that are non-traditional. And in the virtual meetings, I had to schedule virtual meetings just so we could socialize with each other. I didn't realize until we were asked to isolate how social I am and how I love those interactions.
You thought you were an introvert?
I did. I thought I would schedule Zoom meetings and it would be social hour. And that wasn't the students, it was the teachers.
They needed an outlet.
They did.
So Dr. Wyatt-Ross, as you think about assessment, I know, and Stephen, I'm not sure if how broad MAP is across the country, but definitely big in Kentucky, as you know. Is something like MAP a tool that students and teachers can use as something of a diagnostic assessment to gauge where that student is, and for the student to take some ownership of where they are in their learning? And if not, what might we be thinking about in regards to assessment? Not from an accountability standpoint, but from a progress standpoint.
For us, we had used MAP for growth only, to monitor where the students were at certain points in the year. We also have other assessment tools that we use to measure growth. And in my particular program, we don't follow a prescribed pacing guide. Our students, it's more self-paced, but we do set goals with them, and we set goals and we set benchmarks. So when they come to us, they could be anywhere from 0 credits to 17 credits. So depending on where they are when they meet us, we have an expectation that within a month's time of enrollment in our program, they should have X number of courses completed. So for us, that's that benchmark that we look at. And each teacher is identified as a success coach. So they have a list of mentees that they look at and they sit down with and they do that goal planning. So assessment for us, we're assessing progress.
And so for our listeners, Janice, you're in a high school, and so you're really thinking through the lens of those older students and keeping them on track and supporting them to take their next steps after high school. And so that's important to note. I want to turn now to our superintendents who are with us. Casey, we'll start with you just to talk about how you came up with your district's school plan. And as you talk about that, if you'll share for our listeners, kind of, what is your district like as far as makeup, socioeconomics, that sort of thing, and how did that play into how you were thinking about your back to school plan?
Okay, well, let's start with that. We are a rural school district, a small school district. Proximity wise, we're on far western Kentucky, so we overlook the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers. We are minutes away from both Illinois and Missouri and less than an hour from Tennessee. Many of our families cross into these states for work. So we're small, we're rural. We have the financials that go along with that. We're primarily agrarian economy. We are tied as the second largest employer, and we have been the largest employer for a couple of years. We do have a paper mill that has come and gone. So that's where we are. As we put, it was interesting as Dr. Pruitt spoke about the three things that they looked at. I think those are things that we were looking at as we were trying to develop our plan. So we're getting guidance from all over the place, not just from the state. Sometimes you listen to things at a national level, and then you listen to things at a state level, and sometimes they're not always jiving. And then things would get filtered through the Department of Education as well. And so you take in the guidance, the guidance from those types of organizations. Obviously, thinking about health and safety, welfare of our students and our staff. And then it really kind of put us out of our comfort zone a little bit, because a lot of times the last thing we're looking at, which not what any educator's used to, the last thing we're looking at is quality instruction. We're trying to figure out how to do things right, how to be legal and follow expectations, how to keep everyone safe. We kind of talk about the last thing we want is to be the hot spot, in our county. And so up until a couple of weeks ago, we had very few diagnosed cases. As a matter of fact, up until a couple of weeks ago, all of our diagnosed cases of COVID had occurred in previous months. So we were at 0 active cases until a couple of weeks ago, when there was a little bit of an outbreak amongst the 20-something crowd. And so our number of cases that we've had in our county doubled in a week's time with young people. So all of those things went into the making of the plan, and just exactly like when Dr. Pruitt spoke of the plan they'd worked on and how it's a work in progress. It certainly is a work in progress. I would sure that Carrie would agree, in every single district. And we recently had a board meeting, and we set our first day for students at August 26th. And I'm not very technologically savvy. You all got me today, but I can't do a whole lot of things. So, but what I'm comfortable recording YouTube videos that I can send out with someone who's smarter than me on social media. So I had to make very clear that on July 20th, our board made several decisions that will stand until we tell you otherwise, because the board only meets once a month. We did have some special call meetings to talk about this, but so it's been difficult. It's been a work in progress every single day. We've gotten a little bit of extra funding, and I could have spent every penny of that on making sure I had desks in my elementary school. I had no idea the extent to which all of my classrooms have tables, not desks, and for the little ones. And you're not getting 6 foot distance with a whole bunch of tables in a room. So there's just so many things, and taking into account all of those, but certainly trying to figure out, you want to follow all the guidance as best you can. And I really think that's where we've had to fall back. I've had to have conversations with people about we're going to do the best we can. And then we're going to take into account health and welfare and safety and quality instruction. And sometimes that may mean not following all the guidance to a T, because people who are making these recommendations, many of them, if not most of them, haven't been to Ballard County.
Yeah. And so, Casey, you're planning then late in the month to have students back into the school buildings. Teachers are on board with that.
Yes.
And what is broadband access like in Ballard County?
Well,
is virtual even an option?
Say again.
Is virtual even an option?
Yes, it is. And I'll tell you that the state of virtual education in Ballard County has not been robust in the past. However, we have a local telephone provider. We're, again, as a small community, I spoke to the executive of the Ballard Telephone Cooperative, and we had a conversation about increasing access. I think if you look at our numbers, it looks something like 88% connectivity in our county, which is great. But then you find out in a time like in the spring how accurate that really is. Just because someone has access doesn't mean that they don't have 5 kids in their home that all need to be on the computer at the same time, or only have one computer, or only have phones. And so we really have learned more about that as we wrapped up the best we could our previous year, and we're trying to figure out moving forward. So I think we could. Our telephone cooperative has done an excellent job in spreading throughout the county and doing installations and being prepared if we can locate the people that don't have it. And their conversations are still going on daily, doing hotspots. When I spoke with Randy Grogan, who's the head of the cooperative, telephone cooperative, I said, you did one hotspot during the spring, and the hotspot was on our campus. And so, because we are really, we're the biggest single site, so I told him the problem is the people that live in our little communities and our little burgs, they may be relying on school transportation to come and to go. And so if you're in Barlow or Wickliffe or Monkey's Eyebrow, if you all heard of that, that's in Ballard County. If you're in Monkey's Eyebrow, you are 20 minutes away from the school district where the one Wi-Fi hotspot was. So in talking with our local provider, what can we do to create more hotspots? Can we partner with our faith-based organizations and create hotspots in our church parking lots? How much instruction are you actually going to get done if you're a kid sitting in the back seat?
Yeah.
So there's just a whole lot of questions, but virtual education has not been really robust. But as our plans go on, we plan on offering a virtual option, and our goal is to the best extent possible, have Ballard County students taught by Ballard County teachers, whether you are in the classroom or you at home. So our focus has been on the learning management system. I'm not a big fan. Got no issue with anyone who uses it, but I'm not a big fan of just buying a curriculum and putting a child on a curriculum. There is value in what we do as educators, and so we want the students at home to have those interactions as well.
It seems like if there was one thing we learned in the early weeks of the pandemic, the last couple months of school, was that relationships were shining through. So teachers were realizing relationships with students in ways that we had not previously, and that was coming through as a real strength. So holding on to that, Casey, it just makes, combined with whatever delivery needs to be, is critical.
Yeah.
So Carrie, let me turn to you in Rockcastle County. It's kind of the same. Give us a taste of what Rockcastle County is like, and how you designed your reopening plans and where you are in that discussion.
Okay, Rockcastle County is located right at the edge of southeastern Kentucky. We're located on the I-75 corridor. We are a small district, rural. We have around 2,600 students. 3 elementary schools, 1 middle school, and 1 high school. So our plans look very similar to what Dr. Pruitt explained as far as developing a task force. We started with surveying our parents and surveying our staff to get their feedback. And then based on that feedback, we developed 4 task force teams. And those teams were focused on health and safety, quality instruction, exceptional learners, and school and district operations. So we have been meeting with those task force teams, and those teams have been made up of teachers, staff members, janitorial staff, food service staff. We've tried to cover all of our bases within our actual school buildings. We have parents on those teams. We have community members, and we also included the Rockcastle County High School Student Council. And those students have been a valuable part of our task force. And I've been so impressed with their work and their commitment to going back and speaking with their peers and bringing information back to us. And we've actually changed some of our plans based on their feedback and their input. So that's been a very valuable source of information for us. Using all of the work that the task force has done, we have compiled our reopening plans, and we're calling that the Rocket relaunch, because we are the Rockcastle County Rockets. So the Rocket relaunch is, it's basically, we are going to offer a virtual option for our families as well as a traditional option. Our enrollment for our virtual option actually ends tomorrow. Our survey data told us that roughly 15% of our families would choose that option, but in reality, we are up to 30% currently as of this morning. 30% or 800 students have chosen that option. So now we're in the process of determining the spacing within our school buildings to see, do we have enough space that now with these students that are left that are going to be attending in person, can we space them out 6 feet apart and maintaining that safety aspect? So we're in that process now. We've been trying to be very vigilant in relaying every step of this process to our community and to our parents, and keeping them informed of what that virtual school will look like. Is also, what will it look like if you choose to come to school in person? How will your day-to-day routine of your student or your child be different from regular or traditional school? So we've been trying to work really hard to communicate all of that to our families.
So Carrie, how much of the drive for students to be back in the building do you feel is coming from parents' need to also be back at work?
I think very much. We're trying to be very cognizant of families need to go to work, and therefore students need to be in school. And we really, really want to see our students. You know, we value those relationships. We want to have our hands and eyes and on those students and know that they're okay, and that and again, just like Casey stated, well, I never thought that I would say that instruction might be on the back burner for just a moment, but right now we've got to make sure and ensure that our safety of our students is top priority.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, Eric, I want to turn to you on the kind of KSBA, our Kentucky School Boards Association's work, and the Department of Education's work to really provide those healthy at school guidelines. So kind of walk us through, particularly thinking through the lens of parents out there listening or citizens, what are those guidelines that schools need to follow that make this conversation so challenging?
Certainly, thank you for having us on. I'll actually hold it up if anyone watching has not seen it. This is let me tilt it. This is the Healthy at School Guidelines document. It is not very lengthy. It is extremely user-friendly for parents or anyone in the community, any school employees, or even students to pick up and go through. This document was created. I know a lot of the school guidelines and a lot of this issue has become controversial, really even at a national level. So it's important for everyone to realize that the recommendations, the requirements, the best practices that are in this Kentucky document that are governing public schools in Kentucky for the next school year were crafted by Kentuckians. It was largely the input of the Kentucky Department of Education and the Kentucky Department of Public Health, especially 2 doctors in particular who are career people at the State Department of Public Health, Dr. Connie White, Dr. Emily Meserly. So it was informed, as Casey Allen alluded to earlier, the health pieces were really informed by Kentucky doctors, but then it had to meet the educators. It had to meet with the educators from the Kentucky Department of Education to say, well, you know, something like this wouldn't work in a school. It wouldn't, it can't, it won't work well, might backfire for some reason. So when you really look at what finally came out about a month and a half ago, that districts then began using, again, it was sort of gone through with input from the task force. The State Department of Education put together an education continuation task force. A lot of the education stakeholder groups, the school boards, the teachers, the KEA, several others were a part of this group that really worked on and offered input as this guidance was brought together. In 5 critical areas, as I read through it, there are in each of 5 different areas, there are expectations that are requirements, that are something that will have to be done. And then best practices that are things that might go above and beyond a requirement, or things that you might do, but you don't have to. So it's very robust for social distancing. First and foremost, a lot of people jump straight to the mask debate, when really we do not necessarily have to. And that's become the most controversial part of this conversation in Kentucky and America, when really first and foremost, doctors are telling us one of the best things you can do is socially distance. So it talks about in a classroom, staying at least 6 feet apart as much as possible. Very often, depending on how long you're going to be together, if you can be 6 feet apart while you are together, you may not need to wear a mask. So many of our conversations that jump straight to someone either wanting everyone to wear a mask constantly, or the opposite, not wanting to ever wear one. So to a great extent, as also Carrie Ballinger said, we might be able to avoid some of that if we make the most of our space as we can and socially distance. So there are some, as I said, requirements, some best practices on doing that. Then next is cloth face masks and coverings when we are close together for extended period of time. Screening and school exclusion, which I hate that we call it school exclusion, but that is what it is. Taking temperature before a student comes on a bus, taking temperature before student or staff come into a building, trying to go through that, those measurements to try to identify, might you be sick, sick with anything? That's not new. Taking temperature and having students stay home if they might be ill is not new or unique to COVID, but that is one of the best things that we can do to try to identify when someone might need to go get tested for COVID. Of course, building sanitation has a lot of requirements, and then other best practices in the area of keeping our buildings sanitized on a daily and nightly basis. And then the 5th area is contact tracing. If a health department ever calls the school and says either a student or a staff person has tested positive, by state law and regulation, if you test positive in Kentucky, the health department will be notified. Confidentially, the school will be notified and say, well, this person has tested positive. Really, the only piece of that for schools is to then tell the health experts, well, here are the other people that they have been in close contact with for a prolonged period of time, either in a classroom or on a school bus and so forth, so that then those contact tracers can reach out to them and say, you might need to quarantine and get tested in the meantime. So that document came out about a month and a half ago. Immediately, district folks hit the ground running. No doubt about it, some of those things are a real heavy lift, and no one is pretending otherwise. However, several groups looked at it and said, we think we can do this. I mean, the KEA, for one, came out and said, we think our educators can do this. This is good, and we support it. And we have seen that, as you've already heard from 2 superintendents. Districts at the school and district level have really put together plans to have almost every school district in Kentucky currently is planning to have in-person instruction following those requirements and guidelines, to do that as safely as we possibly can, and also at the same time an online option. So that planning, every day another district announces their plan. They are all subject to change, as everything is, but with every day more districts come out with essentially that same approach. That will definitely be the most common. That puts us at about 1 month away, a little bit over 1 month from most districts opening their school year, which is still plenty of time for PD to happen, for teachers to get PD on how they're going to do virtual instruction, how they're going to do some of the, if they're in school, how they're going to do some of the cleaning on a daily basis. Get some of that done ahead of time, get public input, get public awareness, and to really get set up for a great new school year.
It's interesting to think about the costs that we don't naturally think about. Casey, you bringing up, that you had tables in the early elementary years, not desks. And so there are things that you uncover that are going to be costs to make this happen that we wouldn't think about. So that was a really interesting one to me. Go ahead.
I'll just jumping in really quickly. That is why something that Casey Allen mentioned earlier as well, most districts had task forces or committees put together, as Carrie was mentioning, and the membership of those in most places very often, as we said earlier, I think Dr. Wyatt-Ross as well, was very broad, and it needed to be for that reason. We needed teachers on this team to talk about what is instruction going to look like? How will we do this? Are we going to use math assessments early on or not? You needed school board members on, because a lot of this is going to involve purchasing supplies and materials very quickly, rebudgeting, spending money. You needed, school level staff, you needed support staff. A lot of the cleaning and building sanitizing that's going to be happening needs our custodians on this task force and students. And I can tell you in my own, I'm a parent member of a site-based council. I'm active in my district. Our task force had all of these members represented. We live streamed all of the meetings of the task force. The students were the most informative members. The high school students on our task force for reentry were the most impactful. The things that they offered in the chat function of some of these Zoom calls was just phenomenal that we hadn't thought of. So really it's taking everyone to pitch in to make this work, but I think that we do see it coming together.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Eric. I want to pick up on the virtual conversation. So, and since everybody will be doing virtual to some level, offering it as an option, it's really, it's a step past NTI, non-traditional instruction. And what I want to ask all of you is really about quality. Kind of what are some of the standards of quality or the markers of quality that we want to start to really focus on as we move into a more virtual learning environment? What does that look like for the average citizen to better understand how we deliver education in that way and excellence in education in that way?
I'll chime in and just say that I think that we have to not lose touch of building, maintaining, and fostering student relationships. And I think that if we are on that virtual platform, that it would be very easy for that to take place. So I think we have to be very intentional and plan for ways that we can purposefully connect with our students, whether it's a virtual option that they're choosing for their child, or whether it's an extended NTI period, because they are both virtual, but they will be delivered in most districts in a different manner. But in both instances, I think we have to be very, very focused on maintaining student relationships.
That's a great point. So virtual doesn't take the place of the teacher and those relationships, and should not.
Or coaches or clubs or extracurriculars. I think we have to do our best to maintain all of those avenues of communication with our kids.
Well, I'll add that trying to, in explaining it to the community, we want to lessen the divide between what a student would receive in person and what they would receive at home. So for instance, as when I mentioned the learning management system, one of the things that we'll have to work on with our instructional staff is the value in using that learning management system for in-person instruction as well. And so if you're only using it when the students aren't there, then there has to be a difference between the instruction that you're getting in the classroom and then instruction you might be getting at home. However, if you flesh it out and it is the place where your instruction takes place, whether it is it's where you house your resources or you host links to resources and learning, then that can be used whether you're live and in person in the classroom or you're at home. And so that's kind of how we've explained it in our community. We're not there yet, and the clock's ticking. And so that makes me a little anxious. It does. But there are people that are working on it that are better than me, that are working on it every single day. But I think that's how we're trying to explain it to the public is we don't want there to be a huge divide between what we offer in our virtual option and our in-person. We want Ballard County teachers to teach Ballard County kids, whether they are live and in person or they're at home. And so that is going to require all of those side conversations. It's going to require access. It's going to require devices. It's going to require families to be on board with getting their students engaged. We wanted to make sure that everyone understood that the way we ended last year was not going to be what virtual learning would be. We wanted to make sure that everyone understood that the way we ended last year was not going to be what virtual learning would be. It was just enough to get us by. That's what it was. And so we want it to be robust and be better. So.
And I think it's a great point that you make, Casey. As I understand, you talk about that. You're really kind of in a readiness and a preparedness phase. So in this kind of transition moment, even if we're back in the building, we need to deliver education in such a way that we're developing readiness or preparedness for virtual learning. So it is seamless.
Yes, I think
that
yes, that the idea that a student could, who is present for in-person learning, could be gone tomorrow because of a required quarantine or perhaps symptomatic.
Mm-hmm.
That there's not, when students in the past, I'll say, when students have gone on home hospital instruction, we fill out paperwork and we get a teacher who's assigned to deliver instruction. That wouldn't be the need anymore. We need to be more fluid so that students can move in and out of that instruction, whether it's at home or it's in the classroom. And so that only happens if we change what we're doing in person as well. And that's been a little bit hard to explain, and it's been hard to get people on board with. Instructional staff in the building is your in-person instruction has to change too, so that it's more aligned with what we can offer at home, so that everybody's getting the same thing.
Yeah. Janice, you want to jump in here? What are you thinking about it, particularly at the high school level, which is very different than thinking about elementary and middle school?
It is, because we have, there's so much riding on the education for the high school level. And this lens I'm looking at, I just had a daughter to graduate this past year, and her being able to communicate with her teachers. It was a lot of student directed, and that's also the lens that I look at for the expectation for my students. The students are able to, they know what they need, and they know what they're struggling with or what they're excelling in. So I ask the teachers to reach out often and do wellness checks, not so much as hounding, well, you haven't done this, you haven't logged on, but just ask, how are you doing? And more importantly, reach out to the parents as well. Let the parents know that we are there. Ask them if there's anything that they need. But for me, the expectation was, reach out often and ask the students what they need, and make sure we build in the expectation that we're still here, and we want the students to know that they can reach out to us anytime.
Yeah. So Dr. Pruitt, quality in virtual, standards for virtual learning from your lens, 16 Southern states, where do we need to be in this conversation? And there's definitely an equity component here as well. A different, I guess, angle on the equity conversation.
There is a massive equity component here. And I want to just echo what the other three just said. We know from research that the biggest influence on a student's education is the teacher. We know the kind of incredible teachers we have in Kentucky, and we've got to empower them to be able to do what they need to do, which means we do have to do some training. We have to do some professional development. But at the end of the day, those relationships and the social and emotional support for our kids is one of the, if not the most critical part of this. I mean, this has been traumatic for everybody. I'm so tired of seeing the inside of my home. It's been traumatizing, and for the kids who already were experiencing trauma, that relationship. I used to say, and still say, students should have their name called 7 times a day by an adult. And with online learning, there should be no difference. We should make it. That's how we do the no invisible, is that we recognize and are clear that we're reaching out to each child. Now, as far as online learning in and of itself, I mean, we've got to help teachers in the community shift attitudes that really embrace how they intentionally plan for online and blended learning. I loved how Casey talked about, thinking about it both what would be done face-to-face and virtually. We've got to intentionally teach the technology. We can't assume that teachers just simply know the technology and it'll go forward and it'll be just fine. There are platforms that have some great options, but if you've not been trained on it, you don't know how to use them. We've got to make those practices the norm, but to do that, we've got to really engage our teachers in the professional learning around those. I believe we've got to embrace some real innovation, because there's some really quality things online that really need to be able to support lab-based science courses, career and technical education, and the arts and physical education. We can't forget all the other stuff besides math literacy. Now, everybody on this call knows I'm a science guy, and so this isn't just coming from the science guy, but all of you on this call heard me talk about whole child instruction. We can't forget that. We can't forget that we're preparing students for something after school. And so embracing the innovation is already out there in how to really support them in those classes. And finally, you know, I think that districts are really going to have to think about, you know, what might happen if you do have to go fully online. And I know in Jefferson County, that's already happened. Here in Atlanta, we've already seen our 5 biggest school districts in Atlanta now. They've gone back to online learning. But that will go a lot smoother if there's a definitive plan and they've done the things leading up to that, that people can see what happens. We have one school district here in Georgia that's actually doing a test week. They're letting parents and students experience the online component and the face-to-face component so they can make a better decision about which version of that they want to do by providing them a trial period, basically.
How do we, Janice, Stephen, and then others chime in as well. We know that there were some kids, they were invisible in the final months of the school year last year. We lost them somehow, not a large percent, but significant. As we go into the fall, how do we make sure none of our kids are invisible? What are the strategies we need to employ? And does the community need to be involved in some way? I guess what supports are you looking for to make sure that none of our kids are invisible and we've got all of them connected again?
Well, I'll start kind of big picture and then let them talk about the details. But, you know, let's be honest with ourselves here too. They were invisibles before COVID. I mean, that's why we have an achievement gap, folks, because we had, you know, kids that were invisible to the system. So now's the time to reconfigure the system to be deliberate about focusing on these students. And it should be about all students. It shouldn't be about, you know, that oh, we got to make sure our best kids are getting this or even our lowest kids are getting that. It's actually saying, I need to develop some type of strategy. It may be that the teacher says, I'm going to email all my kids every day and I'm going to physically call 5 a day or whatever. But there's got to be some deliberate plan to ensure that we make the invisible visible and that those kids feel that there's somebody, even if it's on the other end of the computer, that cares about them. But it won't happen by accident. It's got to be deliberate. It's got to be thoughtful. And I think it starts with leadership. There's got to be some expectations set.
Others?
For us, it was very intentional in tracking the communication. We kept a Excel spreadsheet where every staff member could access it, and we would track the ways that students were communicating. Was it by phone? Were they logging into the computer system to do their work? Did they respond to emails? We have a group text messaging app that we use, and we tracked that every week. If there was a student who did not respond within a week, we were on it. Their success coach was on it. If their success coach was not successful in reaching them, other staff members would try another avenue. Home visits, that's something that we do anyway. So we would track them down, call neighbors, we would call employers, we would speak to managers. We were going to turn every stone until we found that student. It was just a non-negotiable for anyone for us not to have communicated or reached out or touched any student within a 2-week time span.
I agree go ahead, Eric.
Carrie.
I agree with what Ms. Janice said. I think we have to be very, very, very intentional. And I think we have to really reinvent our roles and responsibilities for all of our staff members. I think that we have to divide those students up, and everybody within the school system has to be responsible for connecting with kids. If you think about a mentorship program within a school, I think that we just have to expand that and make it virtual. And I know this morning, just within my central office staff, we had conversations of, we fully expect that we are going to be responsible for students here in this office of connecting and making certain that everybody shares the load. And I think that that's just going to have to be positively communicated with all of our staff members, that no matter your role or responsibility pre-COVID, that's probably going to look different as we come back to school, and that we're all going to have to be responsible for students.
Eric, from KSBA's standpoint, you're hearing about this, I'm sure. Boards are wrestling with it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this weighs heavily on a lot of our board members. And as right before we close, I want to mention that literally as we've been on this live meeting, the state Child Welfare Oversight and Advisory Committee, which is a legislative committee, has been meeting. I jumped off of that to get on here, and they reminded us yet again, they discussed that the number one source of referrals in Kentucky for suspected child abuse and neglect are teachers in public schools. We are the number one source of all of them. And reports have fallen since in-person instruction ceased last year. But we know that child abuse and neglect, we are the worst state in the country, unfortunately, for sort of per capita child abuse and neglect. That is a major issue that we also have to tackle. I mean, we don't celebrate that. I mean, we exist for education and instruction, even before food and even before some of the other supports for the whole child that we do. But we do recognize that that is a major piece of this. Caring for children is a major thing that Kentucky schools do. So I would just echo what everyone here has said, that we can't let anyone disappear. A lot of students did kind of fall away, as you said, and I think every district. So that will be a big piece of what everyone will have to do to pitch in when we start, especially the more virtual learning that happens, so that none of these kids fall into a situation where no adult sees them except for someone who isn't caring for them the way they should, and that otherwise we typically would have found out about that in school.
Stephen, I want to wrap up with a question to you that I heard you mention this on KET the other night, and it dovetails with a question from one of our viewers about how community members can be involved. Can community members do volunteer tutoring online, mentor in some way, to be the folks who are touching base with some of our students? Are there other ways that you're hearing about Southern states really utilizing the assets of their communities to make sure this moment in time, we come out of it stronger than we went into it? Oh, you're on mute.
If I'm not told I'm on mute at least once a Zoom meeting, it's not a good Zoom meeting.
I know.
I think that what we're seeing is we're seeing districts where they're having sign-up sheets for there to be online tutors for an hour each day. We're seeing, again, the task force type or the local task force type of stuff really coming together where people are doing the outreach. But I got to tell you, one of the best examples of utilizing community assets is right there in Kentucky with the Black Men Working in Fayette County. That is just an extraordinary program where they are leveraging the work of the faith community with the work of Fayette County schools and seeing some pretty incredible outcomes. I have shared that with people all over the South. In fact, if we ever get to have our big board meeting again, I'm going to hopefully get Ms. Ross to come talk so people can hear that. But, that's a great example where if there's a partnership, you can do some pretty incredible things. But I think that we're at a real turning point. And I'll leave this here. In the South, by 2030, before all this hit, we were predicting that we may see 18 million unemployable adults by 2030. Now, that's unemployable, not unemployed. That means that they're not going to have the skills necessary to hold the jobs that automation and artificial intelligence are going to require by 2030. And what COVID-19 has done is accelerated that. That's gone from horizon to the next exit. And it is critical that we take this opportunity to shift our thinking and to obviously the first thing, and Carrie and Casey were absolutely right. Right now it's about safety, but we have to immediately pivot once we get those kind of answers to thinking clearly about how do we position our schools and communities to come together to help provide these students the best opportunity they can to be a viable member of the economic society. And so it's critical. This is not, this is an awful thing to have to go through, but it's also the opportunity to perturb the system enough that we might be able to eliminate the invisible students, but also to and when I say eliminate the invisible students, mean making them visible, just so we're clear, and make sure that each student is prepared for that next step in life. And it's critical right now.
And supported during a time of such uncertainty that we are all experiencing as adults, but our children, particularly those in high school, making the transition to post-secondary in their early years in post-secondary, really facing so much uncertainty right now. They need as much support as they can get. All of our kids do, but just thinking about that group specifically. So I think
we've all got to own it. We've all got to believe that we have a part to play, and that's everybody in the district office, the teaching force, the staff, the state offices, and the community.
It's everybody's business. No
That's
more,
right.
no more true now than ever. So with that, I feel like we've kind of wrapped up on a call to action that as task forces continue, as conversations continue, that citizens, community members, community leaders really ask how they can get involved and how they can bring their strengths and resources to bear to support the movement of the next generation down the path to be prepared for the economy of the future and a big, bold future for Kentucky. I want to thank each one of you for being with us this afternoon. An hour always goes so fast, and there's so much more to share than we can get in, but I think we scratched the surface pretty well. We'll continue to post resources in the comments below. We mentioned the SREB report, and we'll post KDE's Healthy at Schools report as well, and anything else that you all have that you would like us to provide as a resource. I want to thank Kenya, who has been interpreting for us today for the deaf and hard of hearing. We strive to make these conversations as accessible as possible and appreciate always having an interpreter with us to do so. And Kenya, thank you so much. Your first time here with us. We hope we were a conversation we were all right. Thank you. So next week, we will not have a live event, but we will be posting 2 conversations to our social media channels. The first will be tips on getting the most out of virtual learning. And the second will be a study by the University of Kentucky on broadband access in all of Kentucky's counties. We'll be live again on August 5th as I host our student voice team to talk about the results of their Coping with COVID survey, which every single one of our school districts in the state and all 120 counties participated in. So we're looking forward to sharing those results, which it sounds like the superintendents are already using as they're putting plans together. So I want to thank everybody again for watching and thank our panelists for joining us. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us from Georgia. And we're with all of you. You're in our thoughts and our minds, superintendents and educators across the state as you strive to achieve what is a monumental task. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.